train in Mozambique travels through the countryside carrying vital supplies from the ports. But trains like this one and the whole Mozambican infrastructure are now under constant threat. These militiamen, loyal supporters of the Frelimo government, guard the train against a real and growing problem, guerrilla war. It's over 8 years since the Portuguese African Empire collapsed. Yet in Mozambique, the battle continues over who will control the country. Mozambique's hidden guerrilla war threatens the economic and political stability of the whole country. Mozambique's president, Samora Machel, still calls the rebels armed bandits, but their strength and influence are growing. 10,000 people are now said to be backing the Mozambican Liberation Front against 20,000 government forces. These are the rebels, filmed recently in an encampment inside Mozambique. Their movement, the MNR, is as old as Mozambican independence, though most of these recruits are new to the rebel cause. Our cameraman was invited to spend a few weeks with them. His pictures show a disciplined and determined group. But the question is, how long would the organization survive if its foreign backers withdrew their support? The MNR was founded by a group of unhappy white African colonists, Rhodesians and Portuguese, who had a lot to lose as black African independence swept the continent. Today, information about who funds the organization and why is highly disputed, but informed sources point to South Africa. Mozambique's white-ruled neighbor insists that the Samora Machel regime is a communist threat in southern Africa and a backer of the banned African Nationalist Congress. Pretoria has allegedly supplied the MNR with money, training, and equipment. The MNR leadership, however, plays down any links with South Africa. It simply says that the rebels have increasing support from the Mozambican population to overturn the Frelimo government. The rebels insist that the Frelimo government is unpopular and that the MNR would bring full democracy and prosperity to Mozambique. Scenes like this one, a huge welcome for President Samora Machel, tell a different story. Samora Machel, 50 years old this year, has led Mozambique since independence in 1975. He's a popular and charismatic leader who often joins in the criticism of his own government. He's been the first to make charges of corruption and inefficiency, and he's fired many officials who have failed to solve the country's enormous economic problems. Towns and cities throughout Mozambique still carry revolutionary posters reminding the people of their recently won victory for self-rule. The posters call on Mozambicans to participate in the continuing struggle to establish a socialist society. And these days, they remind people that they must continue to fight for an independent state that will serve the needs of all the people. The history of the Frelimo organization goes back more than 20 years. A new generation may not remember the guerrilla war that finally ousted the colonialists, so posters like these are meant to tell people about the new threat to Mozambican independence, a force funded by external interests who wish to see the Frelimo government destabilized. After almost a decade of independence, Mozambique is still desperately poor. The Frelimo government says that this situation will only change once the country is rid of foreign interference. But the worrying trend is towards more outside interference, which drives both foreign investment and expertise away. Before independence, all sectors of the Mozambican economy were dominated by white settlers. Today, the Frelimo government has embarked on ambitious development plans in fisheries and agro-industries. One of the larger projects is to expand the country's lucrative shrimp industry. The Portuguese settlers also built up a competitive textile industry, which flourished between the two world wars. Cotton and material are still important export earners. This factory in Chimoio is privately owned. That's rare, but Frelimo's policy of widespread nationalization hasn't worked, so the government is becoming more and more flexible and turning to a mixed economy. The Mozambican economy is still primarily agricultural. Despite migration to the cities, the bulk of the population still lives on the land, mostly in abject poverty. Few people can read or write, although Frelimo has made literacy a major target. In the last few years, the growing rebel war and disastrous weather conditions have made life for people on the land even worse. The country does have the capacity to feed itself, but poor planning and inefficient distribution have led to stagnation in the agricultural sector. Only last April, a report to Mozambique's Congress complained that traditional peasant farmers weren't being encouraged to produce food for themselves or for export. The country still has to import many staples, although efforts are being made to cut back the food import bill. Milk is still a luxury for most of the population. People have stood in line for hours for a cup, a supplement to the traditional diet of maize and beans, a diet that many Mozambicans dreamed they would leave behind for meat and bread when the revolution came. The reality is far from the dream. Shelves are often empty. Even the middle classes have had to put up with some cutbacks, though foreign currency shops are richly stocked with goods from South Africa. In the rural areas, there's been a 50% drop in the availability of consumer goods. Disgruntled peasants say they're short of even the simplest things like hose and bicycle parts, soap and cloth. Western agricultural specialists say that many of the problems are due to poor planning, because in Mozambique, as in many African countries, priority is given to the needs of the urban population. Poor pricing and distribution policies favor the cities and leave those who actually grow the food and raise the livestock unrewarded. Peasants in the north have at times refused to sell bumper crops or even harvest them. They say that fixed prices are too low, and again, there aren't enough goods to spend their money on. This Swedish-built sawmill in Chimoio was one of Mozambique's most important development projects. It opened on schedule almost a year ago, but MNR attacks quickly closed it down. Today it lies empty and abandoned. At $46 million, it was Mozambique's most costly foreign aid project. But the security of Swedish personnel who came to teach the Mozambicans how to run the plant could not be guaranteed, and that's a great worry for the Maputo government. The worsening security situation is now a major obstacle to the overseas investment the country so desperately needs. Workers at the plant formed themselves into a militia, but it was too little and too late. The Swedish embassy said that the risk of ambush or abduction by MNR guerrillas had become too great. And the presence of these poorly equipped and trained men could not make them change their minds. Mozambique's strategic position both helps and hinders its chances of economic independence. The Indian Ocean port of Beira has now taken on a new role. It's the key to the plan by black states in southern Africa to reduce their dependence on South African transport. The capital, Maputo, also has an important deep natural harbor, and both cities now act as shipping and freight centers for the frontline states. Maputo port receives ships from all over the world. Income from overland transport and loading facilities is a vital foreign exchange earner. And it is from here that overland freight trains are loaded to carry goods to much of landlocked Central and Southern Africa. used to be charges that port facilities were either underutilized or subject to bottlenecks. Their efficient use affects not only the Mozambican economy, but also the economies of neighbors like Malawi and Zimbabwe. This tanker from Monrovia is pumping ashore 16,000 tons of fuel, which will be sent up the pipeline to Zimbabwe. Another indication of Mozambique's determination to assist where it can in the new economic strategy of its black neighbors. But the pipeline, like the railway, has come under frequent attack by the rebel MNR. Last year, MNR saboteurs blew up storage tanks and destroyed millions of gallons of oil, which should have gone to Zimbabwe and Malawi. The government has had to step up security around all its important transport routes. Just about any form of travel is now dangerous in many areas of the country. Armed men have even been known to take pot shots at cars and trucks. A Frelimo anti-aircraft gun protects a reconstruction project on a bridge near Beira. It was blown up 2 years ago by the MNR. The MNR strategy of attacking important transport links continues to be so successful because Mozambique can't afford the helicopters and other hardware needed to fight a traditional anti-guerrilla war. Once this bridge is completely repaired, a local militia unit will be assigned to protect it. Power lines have also been targets. Late last year, the MNR cut Beira's electricity supply 4 times. Foreign crews needed to build roads and electricity lines are increasingly reluctant to take on the jobs. The rail link, stretching 200 miles east to the port of Beira, is a key link to Mozambique's flagging economy. This Mozambican steam engine, loaded with rice and paper pulp bound for Zimbabwe, arrives at the railhead at Masipamba, a few miles from the border. But these days, the trains must be guarded over the whole route by both Mozambican and Zimbabwean troops. The shunting yards at Beira are littered with wrecked locomotives. Some have been shelled, others blown up by MNR landmines. Each engine will cost $1 million to repair. But Mozambique is short of foreign currency and can't afford to replace the locomotives or buy the spares needed to keep their rail system in peak condition. Besides damage to rolling stock, attacks on trains have led to a heavy loss of life. 1,200 Zimbabwean troops and a few from Tanzania are now helping secure various transportation links. In 1982, 3 separate attacks on trains killed more than 30 people and injured almost 200. In one attack in Sofala province in August 1982, the guerrillas were allegedly assisted by Israeli as well as South African advisors. According to latest reports, the MNR is now active in 2/3 of the country. In July, our cameraman was invited to watch the MNR in action. He spent a month in central Mozambique watching the day-to-day life in what the guerrillas call a liberated area. On July 23rd, the group prepared to stage an ambush on the Malawi-Beira Railroad. According to their own spokesman, the action was part of an offensive codenamed Red August. This particular group of guerrillas was working in the Gorongosa area. The spokesman for the group said the rebels were operating in 9 of Mozambique's 10 provinces. It took these men 3 days of trekking over 100 kilometers to reach the planned ambush point. And then the rebels attacked the passing train. The attack was considered a success, although 2 guerrillas died and 5 were wounded. The guerrillas claimed that losses were much heavier on the other side. They reported that the train was being guarded by the 509 Frelimo battalion based at Imhaminga. They claimed to have killed 25 of the government soldiers. The president of the MNR, Alfonso Dhlakama, claims he had a narrow escape and that 3 of the wounded were high-ranking members of his organization. He also told reporters that the train they attacked was made up of 15 carriages carrying food and other supplies to Beira from Malawi. The priority is to get the wounded back to base so that bullets or shrapnel can be removed. The guerrillas say they suffer from a chronic shortage of all types of medicine, including antibiotics and anesthetics. The guerrillas say the attack on the train netted them at least 1 heavy machine gun. The base clinic is staffed by nurses who do everything from administering medicine to operating. The guerrillas say that every one of the areas they now work in has medical facilities similar to this one. The nurses, in turn, pass on basic information to the soldiers. They say that local civilians also make use of the MNR's clinics. At the time of independence, there were only 36 trained black doctors in the country. The Machel government has scored a success in improving the basic health of most Mozambicans. The MNR-controlled areas, however, seem to suffer from a lack of real medical expertise. The guerrillas are rarely idle. When they're not patching up their men, they're repairing their equipment and cleaning their weapons. They say that 2/3 of their weapons are captured from government forces. The other third they buy from friendly countries, but they won't name names. Mozambique's rulers believe the source is in South Africa, from Portuguese and South African business interests. The guerrillas are determined not to be a ragtag army. One of the busiest men in the camp is the tailor, who fights a perpetual battle against the ravages of the bush. Rebel armies usually set up liberated areas where they provide various social and welfare services to the local population. That's what Frelimo did when it was in the bush, when the Portuguese were in power. At first glance, it might appear the MNR are doing the same, but although they do run training schools, most of them are to improve the MNR's own intelligence gathering, or, as here, to keep their nursing staff up to strength. And there's been no attempt to set up a rebel government in exile. The guerrillas' opponents say this shows they're essentially a destabilizing force, saboteurs, not freedom fighters. The MNR says that efforts towards self-sufficiency are only sensible. Apart from training people it needs, it also grows as much of its own food as possible so that it doesn't have to make heavy demands on food from the local population supplies. That's especially important now because many parts of Mozambique have suffered from the 2-year drought that has ravaged Africa. MNR leaders claim that Frelimo forces have made excessive demands on local food stocks, and the peasants have come to hate them because of it and have even begun to deny food to government troops. The guerrillas were pleased to show us their efforts at food production. They claim scenes like this show that they're well established in the region and not just a fly-by-night group of saboteurs. Under the gaze of a foreign news team, the rebel leader was eager to present himself as a man of the people, ironically aping the common touch of his sworn enemy, Samora Machel. The guerrillas claim the villagers are pleased to see them and are joining their movement. There are reports, though, of guerrilla atrocities against uncooperative villagers. The familiar pattern, it's said, is that rebel units arrive at a village demanding food and sanctuary. If they don't get them, they take them. And then they seek out officials of the Frelimo government, kill them, and mutilate their bodies. If those reports are true, it's hardly surprising that most villagers put on a welcome, whatever their politics. The guerrillas have, in fact, very little political ideology. They seem united only in their opposition to Frelimo and communism.
Viva resistência! Viva! Viva resistência! Viva!
The MNR's self-styled president, Afonso Dhlakama, tries to draw more young Mozambicans to the guerrillas' creed of sabotage and total opposition to President Machel.
Falta de sabão, falta de hospitais, escolas para os filhos.
Mais de ser simplesmente uma extensão, braço armado.
Dhlakama was asked about South Africa's sponsorship of MNR activities.
Isso é propaganda.
To him, it's all propaganda. His version is that the guerrillas have no links with South Africa. He says it's the Mozambican government that has the ties and claims there's an exchange of information between the intelligence services of South Africa and Mozambique. The MNR leader also says he regrets the world is not properly informed of the situation in Mozambique. The 30-year-old rebel leader says an MNR government would have contact with all countries and would eliminate the communist threat.
Isto é para esconder a situação interna de Moçambique.
These pictures came from South African television. Pretoria has denied providing the MNR with anything more than moral support, but that denial is widely challenged outside the country. Reports of South African Army helicopters flying MNR supplies to Mozambique and South African casualties inside that country cause embarrassment for Pretoria. When an MNR leader was killed near Pretoria, a news blackout was imposed. Although MNR operations are mainly sabotage, kidnapping, and ambushes, the guerrillas have also taken prisoners. At this camp in the Gorongosa area of Mozambique, near the rebel base camp, there were 41, including a counterintelligence colonel and the commander of an infantry battalion. Given the stories circulating about how the rebels treat government officials, these men must fear for their lives. To be caught by either side now carries a death risk. These captured rebels know many of their colleagues have been executed by the Frelimo government on charges of terrorism, sabotage, and high treason. The government has learnt to its cost that the MNR must be taken seriously. It now plans to place 1 million men and women under arms in workers' militias to protect the country's economic institutions. Post-revolutionary Mozambique has enormous economic hurdles to overcome, even without the problem of systematic sabotage. The continued undermining of its efforts pushes the country further towards chaos and economic domination by South Africa. As the guerrilla threat continues, the fear is that President Machel might be pressed so hard he will turn to his friends for military help. And if those friends included the Cubans, who are already involved in a similar situation in Angola, then Mozambique could face the prospect of a direct military confrontation with South Africa. In its present economic plight, that's the last thing the country could cope with. For the moment, Mozambique's embattled president can only grit his teeth and try to contain the war which the rebels call the country's second revolution.